Good evening, everyone in Alberta, Canada, and beyond. It is Wednesday, June 5th, 2024, and I'm Kerry Lambert, and I welcome you to an evening of solutions for a new Alberta brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project, also known as APP. APP's purpose is to educate, inspire, and unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect their prosperity, individual freedoms, rights, and self-determination by empowering the Alberta government to restructure Alberta's relationship within or without Canada. Of course, we couldn't do this without your help. If you can, please share this webinar. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Rumble, as well as after this live. We're also on other video and audio sites like Apple, Spotify, BitChute, and Vimeo. We'd like to point out the website. There are amazing Alberta Prosperity website, albertaprosperityproject.com. Once again, I'm running this on my own. If anybody can help me out here, that would be amazing. We're always asking for volunteers, and I say that in jest, but man, sometimes it's been one of those days. It would be nice to have somebody else do this while I just ramble. Of course, APP is membership driven with the goal of 1 million plus members to help steer the political process. APP memberships are 1 year for $20, 2 years for $30, 3 years for $40, or you can make a donation at albertaprosperityproject.com. Also want to bring up the Support 5 initiative. If you go on the website, you go support us. Go support us. There it goes. We're talking about the Support 5 initiative, and basically it's 555 if you think of it that way. 5 minutes a week on social media. Like, share, and comment on our posts. You can also do recruiting 5 new supporters monthly. And of course, that grows our community strength and reach and network as well. And then the last thing is a $5 monthly donation. And that's to fuel our initiatives, empowering us to plan effectively and push forward towards our goals. If you can do any of those 3, or ideally all 3 of that, would be amazing. The other thing I want to point out is some of our events. And you can go there by upcoming events, and you'll get to our events page. I actually just want to talk a little bit about what happened on Saturday. We actually had our Alberta Prosperity Project members meeting in New Sarepta, which is just outside Edmonton. And I'd personally like to thank all of those who attended and our volunteers as well. It was an all-day event with silent auction. We had an exercise on the strengths and weaknesses of APP and growing our membership, and that was led by our CEO, Jonathan Baines. We had speeches by one of our founding members and leader, of course, Dr. Dennis Modry. And we also had our now ex-CEO, Chris Scott, who passed the reins over to Jonathan Baines. And we also had tonight's webinar guest, Michael Wagner, give the keynote speech on Alberta independence and why Canada cannot be fixed. And of course, that's what we'll be talking about tonight. And I also did want to mention that we had Donald Lee, who we've also had on the webinars before. He was there selling some books. And we also had I Am Albertan was selling their merchandise, and that's actually run by Kate Graham, who also does our APP weekly newsletter. So if you get your newsletter and you like the information, reach out to Kate and tell her she's doing an awesome job. And I wanted to put, I'm not even sure if I can actually see this. This is one of those I Am Albertan buttons. Isn't that cool? So I'm definitely going to be wearing that around. And much like I wear my APP shirt, or I've got a couple of APP shirts, they're just things that initiate a conversation. And people are, oh, I'm an Albertan too. Oh, really? Oh, that's great. Let's have a conversation about what being an Albertan is all about. And I think that would be an interesting way. And they have lots of different merchandise through I Am Albertan. They've got license plates, they've got stickers, they've got shirts. I think they're getting flags done. Unfortunately, I actually don't have a website for her. If Kate is watching, or maybe if our good friend Michelle Buisson is watching, if you know of a website for the I Am Albertan, I should have reached out to her before, but you know me, I just do things on my own. So I just thought that it would be good to show that's what's going on. And if you're ever wanting to know what is going on in this province in terms of things to do, let me tell you, what you should be doing is going to this amazing website. It's Alberta, or freedomcalendar.net. I'm going to throw that up here as well. I know I have that somewhere in here, and if not, then I'm just going to take down this one. Yes, I don't have that one right now. But if you go to freedomcalendar.net, and in there, there's a lot of different events going on. So, of course, I'm dealing with the Alberta Pension Plan, and we've got events. So if you click on the Alberta Pension, you will find out that we did an event in Calgary last night. We're doing an event in Taber tomorrow, another event in Calgary next Monday, and Athabasca next Wednesday. Then Barhead, I'm actually going to be the MC. We're going to have Corey Morgan and Tanner Day up there. So if you're in Barhead next Thursday, it would be great to see you guys up there. And we're also doing one in Muir at our alma mater. Yeah, that's not really true, but the place that is near and dear to our hearts, of course, it's the Whistle Stop Cafe. So that is in Muir on next Friday, which is the June 14th. So you can find out more about these events, as well as a whole bunch of other events that are happening in Alberta. So I think I've rambled on. Have I rambled on too much there, Michael? I'm seeing him backstage just laughing, because that's what we do. So with that, yeah, let me get back to my notes here. I'm going to hide this because we don't need to see that. We'd much rather see me, I guess. I'm not quite sure. Tonight's episode is called "The Alternatives Have Failed and Only Independence Will Work." And that's, of course, with Dr. Michael Wagner, who is an independent researcher, historian, an author, and writer with a conservative perspective and a PhD in political science from the University of Alberta. He's a senior writer for the Western Standard and Alberta Report. He's been involved with the Alberta independence movement since 1905. That's the same joke I did last Saturday, and I'm pretty sure it still fell on deaf ears. 1905 is when Alberta was incorporated. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but this has been going on since really we came into Confederation, and I'm sure Dr. Wagner will tell us a little bit more. And he and his wife live in Edmonton, where they have been home educating their 11 children. And I know he's got a flag behind his head, and I don't know what that's about, but we'll get him on here. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Thanks for having me on here. Yeah.
Oh, there's that Oilers.
They're in the finals, so I got to put my flag up there.
Well, I guess it's Canada's team, it's Alberta's team, so I'm not jumping on the bandwagon, but I'm certainly not saying go Panthers.
That's good.
Because I know that's the opposite. So how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah.
Good, excellent. And it was great to see you on Saturday, and you did the keynote address. And the keynote address was based upon a book, I believe. Has it been published yet?
Only in Kindle, I'm afraid. Like, it's taking longer than expected. So it is available in Kindle, and it will be eventually available in print as well.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the one. It's just hopefully in the next few weeks or something. But for now, I mean, I'm not an electronic book person, and I don't know many people that are. So I'm more anxious to get it in print. But there it is. It exists.
You know what? This is good because anybody that knows Kindles are all like 25 years and then younger.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get the young folk to actually begin to start to read this. I can't wait to actually read this as well. And granted, I have read books on my phone, but it's just not the same as actually having a book. And maybe I'm just old school, as we're all old school. But so Time to Leave, Canada Cannot Be Fixed, and that was, and your keynote was awesome. It gave examples of what was going on or what has happened in the past in Alberta, and how we got into Confederation, and how we basically it has not worked out for us at all. So I'm not quite sure. Do you want to give that speech, or do you want to just pull maybe items out of that speech, and we'll talk about what your conclusions are?
Maybe I'll just start, and then when I trip up, you can jump in and help me.
That sounds awesome. Let's do it that way.
Like as you mentioned, Alberta, of course, became a province in 1905.
Yeah,
and there were, right from the very beginning, there were people who were upset with the West's relationship with Canada. And of course, during the early part of Alberta's history, there were a lot of farmers' movements. Like, farmers were not, they didn't have a really good deal in terms of being able to sell their products for a good price and purchase products that they needed at a good price. So during, right from the beginning, there was lots of farmers' movement. So at that time, Albertans and other Westerners did not look towards independence as an option. Instead, they looked to alternative political movements. So they abandoned the mainstream political parties. And, in Alberta, for the 1920s and into the 1930s, we had the United Farmers of Alberta was the government, and then that was replaced by the Social Credit Party, which was even more different from other parties.
That's right.
At the federal level, in the 20s into the 30s, Alberta's main party was the Progressive Party. So Albertans, and then after that, it was the Social Credit for a number of years. So Albertans have been struggling, to try and get equity within Confederation, basically right from the beginning, or very close to that. Yeah. But they didn't look to independence as an alternative seriously until Pierre Trudeau became Prime Minister in the late 1960s. And that's when things really began to change, because Pierre Trudeau really attacked Alberta in a nasty kind of way. When the oil prices went up in 1973 as a result of a war, and Alberta should have cashed in on that oil, and it did to some degree, but not as much as it should have, because Pierre Trudeau, he put an export tax on oil so that when oil was exported out of Alberta, the federal government would take a huge percentage of that, and also he kept the price of oil within Canada low, so Alberta did not get the proper price for it. So whether we sold oil within Canada or exported it, we were not getting the proper amount of money we were supposed to get as a provincial resource, and the federal government was taking it. So that was kind of the real beginning of the fight between Alberta and the federal government in a way that would make Albertans look towards independence. So that was actually started a little over 50 years ago. So radar, realistically, for about 50 years, but for the most part, most Albertans haven't favored the independence option so far. And so instead of independence being a major movement in the last 50 years, it is from time to time, but mostly there's people trying to find ways of getting Alberta's situation improved within Canada. Yeah. And so that's what I'm talking about. Like when I say alternatives have failed, I mean, there are many, many well-meaning people, smart people, hardworking people who tried the right things to get Alberta's situation fixed within Canada. And it's not their fault that it wasn't able to get fixed. It's the fault of Central Canada, because whenever you look to Central Canadian politicians to get something, to create a situation where Alberta will be more equally treated, they're not interested. Central Canadian politicians are elected in Central Canada to defend the interests of Central Canada. And so that's what there's no reason for Albertans to expect that, MPs elected in Ontario and Quebec are going to do something for us. And so the alternatives I talked about basically required that. And there's kind of two main streams of alternatives that Albertans have looked towards. One is, voting for the Conservative Party as a way of getting the Liberals out and getting better treatment. And there's a sense in which that does make things better. There is absolutely no question that the Conservative Party, whether it was the Progressive Conservative Party in the past or the Conservative Party now, there's no question that that's better than the Liberal Party for Alberta. There's just no question. There's no comparison. Nevertheless, even when we have Conservative Party governments, we haven't been able to solve the kinds of problems that we want. And this was especially, prevalent or emphasized when Pierre Trudeau finally resigned in 1984. Albertans, despised him in the Liberal Party. To make a long story short, Brian Mulroney became Prime Minister in an election in 1984, and Albertans thought our problems were solved because all of our members of Parliament, when the Progressive Conservative Party, they were part of the government. We had some of them were cabinet ministers in the Mulroney government, and we thought everything was going to turn out okay, but it didn't turn out okay. And the reason for that is when the Conservatives get elected in the government, it's because they have a large number of members of Parliament from Ontario and Quebec. And because that is you have to have the majority of MPs from Ontario and Quebec to become a federal government in Canada. And so that means that the federal government will prioritize what's important for Ontario and Quebec, and they always do. So even though Brian Mulroney had, dozens of members of Parliament from the West and all of Alberta's, excuse me, Central Canadian concerns were still the main concerns for his government. And this was demonstrated very, very clearly in 1986 because Canada had recently bought the CF-18 fighter jets, and they needed a place where those fighter jets could be maintained. And it was a very, very large government contract to maintain those fighter jets. There was only 2 cities in the country that had the facilities to maintain the fighter jets, Winnipeg and Montreal. So the government held a competition by a particular criteria, which of these companies would do it best, for the best price. And Winnipeg won. It wasn't, everybody knew it, Winnipeg won, but Mulroney's government awarded the contract to Montreal. And we all know that's because, Mulroney himself was a Quebec member of Parliament, and he had way more MPs from Quebec than he had from Manitoba or from the West. Or at least from Manitoba. I mean, there would be lots from the West, but anyway.
And I grew up in Winnipeg, and I remember all that happened. And I was just a teeny bopper, and everybody in Manitoba hated what was happening in the federal government specifically because of that. And I think they announced that it was awarded in Winnipeg too, and then they took it back. I think that's what happened. But yeah, either way, it didn't work out well for Winnipeg.
Yeah, well, I was living at Calgary at the time, and even in Calgary, it was a huge, huge deal. Like, I mean, it was seen as a slap in the face, and it was seen as a betrayal. I mean, that was the thing, right? They betrayed us. It wasn't just, if that had been Trudeau doing that, people would have been angry. But this was more than just government doing something against us. We voted for those guys. They were going to do something good for us, and instead they kicked us in the face, right, and gave it to somebody else. So that kind of intensified, right? It intensified the anger against the Mulroney government, the fact that they had betrayed us after we had supported them so strongly. And anyway, but the point of that argument is that, just because you vote for a conservative government and get a conservative government and get the Liberals out, it doesn't mean you're going to always get policies that are beneficial to the West, because every government, I'll say this over and over again, every federal government has to cater to Ontario and Quebec if they want to stay in power, if they want to gain power, and if they want to stay in power. And that's that's probably the biggest example, of that happening. And so that's why it's so important. Well, it's important to emphasize that point, but also because that was essentially the spark that led to the creation of the Reform Party, which was a great idea. Like Preston Manning's idea was, let's get a political party that represents the West. We have our MPs will be in Ottawa to represent our concerns and to explain, to Central Canada and to the federal government that we need a change in our constitution so that the West can be represented equally and not just be kicked to the curb, whenever there's an important decision. So one of the important thrusts of the Reform Party was the Triple E Senate. So like I'm talking about two streams of things here. One is, we look to the Conservative Party to save us from the Liberals, or to save us from Central Canada. And we also looked at constitutional reform. And so the Reform Party was strongly supporting Senate reform. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, though, because Senate reform actually goes back to the 1970s. Like, this is a separate stream, this idea of constitutional reform. It was actually in the 1970s when Peter Lougheed, our premier, was fighting Pierre Trudeau over oil, that Peter Lougheed set up a committee to recommend constitutional changes that would benefit Alberta. And that committee came to the conclusion that an elected Senate with an equal number of senators from each province, would be the thing that could do that. Now, right now, we don't have an equal number of senators from each province. Like, Ontario and Quebec have lots, and Alberta and the prairies have very few. So this looked like a realistic. This would look like a very, a realistic and beneficial idea. Let's change the Senate so that each province has an equal number of senators, and where they're elected. Like, that was unique, because right now, still, the Prime Minister gets to appoint whoever he wants. If Alberta, if there's a Senate opening in Alberta, Justin Trudeau gets to choose whoever he wants. Like, he's not accountable to anybody. And you'd think that in a country like Canada, that's a mature democracy, we'd be able to elect all of the people that make the laws for us. I mean, the senators, they have to pass legislation to make them laws in Canada. So we have appointed people who have
appointed, not elected. That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. So, like, why wouldn't we have those people elected? It just makes sense. You know what I mean? But of course, because of the way things are, Central Canada benefits by the existing Senate, and so they weren't willing to go in that direction. But so the Senate reform idea, though, really took off after the 1970s. And in 1981, the Canada West Foundation, which is a major think tank in Calgary, they published like a book-length proposal for the Triple E Senate. Okay, I should qualify. What is a Triple E Senate? That's a Senate that would be elected, as I mentioned. There would be equal number of senators from each province, and they would have effective powers. So those are the three E's for Triple E Senate. Actually, it was Ted Byfield, the founder of Alberta Report magazine, who apparently invented the term Triple E to explain that. So in 1981, Canada West Foundation published that book, which was the first major proposal for the Triple E Senate. Then in 1983, an Alberta Committee for an Elected Senate was created, headed by Bert Brown, who was a well-known political activist and farmer at that time. Then in 1984, like, Alberta's government at that time, Peter Lougheed and then later Don Getty, was the Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta. That party at their 1984 convention endorsed the Triple E Senate idea, so the governing party of Alberta. Then a few months later, early in 1985, there was a legislative committee in the Alberta legislature of the government that also wrote a document endorsing the Triple E Senate concept as a way of reforming Canada. So that's in early 1985. Later that year, Don Getty became Premier of Alberta, and he personally endorsed the Triple E Senate idea. And he later created a committee that would promote the Triple E Senate idea across Canada. Okay. And then in 1989, Don Getty held Canada's very first Senate election. Like in October of 1989, there was an election in Alberta. Like the Progressive Conservatives had a candidate, the Reform Party Liberals, and there were some independents. But the winner was Stan Waters of the Reform Party. And so Brian Mulroney very reluctantly appointed him to the Senate, but that was Canada's very first elected senator. But the point is, at this time, it looked like Senate reform was on a roll. You know, we had the Alberta government was not just accepting it, but promoting it across the country and holding an election to promote it. Then in 1993 was a federal election, and the Reform Party won 52 members of parliament, like most of Alberta's and some of the other, Western. So, and that was a party, and that was the Tripoli Senate was a major part of their platform. Mm-hmm. So it really looked like Senate reform was on a roll, in the early 90s, but it didn't go anywhere because in Eastern Canada, they're not interested in Senate reform. In Central Canada, I should say. Yeah. So it kind of just petered out. It petered out until Stephen Harper became prime minister, because he really believed in Senate reform. Like, Stephen Harper had been one of the original Reform Party members of Parliament. And to make a long story short, the Reform Party eventually became what was called the Canadian Alliance Party in 2000. A couple years later, Stephen Harper became leader of the Canadian Alliance. Then he led it into a merger with the remnants of the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada to form the new Conservative Party of Canada as we know it today. Then, of course, in 2006, he was elected prime minister in a minority government. But he really believed in Senate reform, and he wanted to use his position as prime minister to get some kind of Senate reform in Canada, and he did. Like, there were several bills he proposed in the Senate and in the House of Commons, but they were blocked because there wasn't enough support in Central Canada for that kind of thing. And what's interesting is these laws, they would have had they would have had it so that senators in Canada had to run in those same kind of elections that Alberta had held in 1989. In fact, Alberta did have more Senate elections after that. The 1989 one was the first. Then there was one in 1998 and 2004. And 2012 and 2021, I think it was 5 altogether. But that Burt Brown, who I mentioned, who was head of the Senate committee, he ended up winning those Senate elections in 1998 and 2004. So Stephen Harper actually then appointed him to the Senate. Before Stephen Harper, of course, was Brian Chrétien Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin, and they wouldn't appoint, Alberta's elected senators. But when Harper was in, he would appoint the ones that were elected, like Burt Brown, for example. But his laws were proposing that each of the provinces would have those kind of elections. Like they would elect, say, a handful of people, and those handful of people would be then sent to the prime minister. He would choose from among those. So there would still be an aspect of the prime minister choosing, but it wouldn't be him choosing his own people. He would have to choose from among the people that were elected. So they were, So they were like advisory elections. There was a particular term for it, and it slips in my mind. And also, Stephen Harper wanted to put term limits on the senators, like 9 years in. Right now, I think they're appointed to life, or at least until they're 75. Anyway, these were the kind of reforms that Stephen Harper wanted. But eventually, the Quebec government got concerned about the potential for Senate reform, and they initiated a reference case at the Quebec Court of Appeal, asking the Quebec Court of Appeal to rule on the constitutionality of the proposals that Stephen Harper was making. So because of that, Stephen Harper kind of wanted to head off that Quebec case by him going directly himself to the Supreme Court of Canada as the federal government, asking the questions that he wanted about Senate reform. But the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that any of the kinds of changes that Stephen Harper wanted would require a constitutional amendment, which is almost essentially impossible, because you have to have at least 7 provinces and some other recommendations. So that was for the most part, that was what killed Senate reform. But the point is, we had Senate reform. The first idea was in the 1970s, and it went through that Supreme Court case was in 2014. So we had several decades of people working on that, and it was a good idea. You know what I mean? Like, we could reform the Senate. I mean, who could defend an appointed Senate? Like, who could really defend that? An appointed Senate, which with unequal representation depending on which province you're in. You know what I mean?
Friends of friends, and if we're electing everybody else, then why are we not electing the Senate? No.
So it totally makes sense to reform the Senate. You know what I mean? And they tried decades and decades. But I figure if Stephen Harper as prime minister can't get any kind of reforms through, who can? You know what I mean? Right. Like, who can, I there are people, and really good people, still proposing, well, let's change the Constitution and that'll make things better for Alberta. Well, if we could change the Constitution, maybe it could, maybe. But in order to get that constitutional change, you have to have the approval of politicians elected in Central Canada. You have to. There's no question about it. And they're not elected to benefit us. They're elected to benefit the people that elected them, right? I mean, it makes sense that an MP from Ontario is going to defend Ontario. That makes sense. That's his job, right? An MP elected in Toronto is going to do whatever is best for Toronto. That's what he's elected to do. That's his job. We can't expect him to want to help us, even if he's with the Conservative Party. So basically, I guess I've kind of summarized the main thrust of what I'm talking about. That the alternatives have failed. That is, Senate reform has failed, not because there's anything wrong with the idea, not because the people didn't try hard enough, not because they weren't smart enough. It was the best people doing, the smartest thing, but there's just vested interests in Central Canada. They have the power to prevent it, and they always will, because it doesn't benefit them; it benefits us. So I'm arguing. I argue that people who are right now proposing constitutional initiatives to benefit Alberta, I don't think that's going to work. I don't see that as an alternative. We need an alternative where Albertans get to make the decision. And of course, there is an alternative that way, a very powerful alternative called the Referendum for Independence. We don't need anybody's approval to do that. We don't need approval from Ontario or Quebec or BC or anybody. We get to do that ourselves. So if we want a solution to Alberta's problems within Confederation, it's got to be a solution where we get to make the decisions ourselves. And that decision would be, an independence referendum. We could decide on what we want. And one of the things that's really interesting about the independence referendum, and Dr. Modry makes this point, and it's a valid point, that if we pass this independence referendum, that doesn't mean for sure that Alberta would become independent. It means that there'll be negotiations and Alberta might become independent, because what would very likely happen if we had that referendum and passed it, almost certainly the federal government would immediately have, be in love with us and have offer us all kinds of goodies. You know what I mean? They will come forward with proposals to keep us in. And as reasonable people,
unless they think that it's an empty threat. And then they'll go, okay, go ahead. Let's see what you can do.
Well, that would be interesting.
That would be interesting.
But I don't favor making a deal with them on that basis. I think if we pass, for me personally, I think if we pass the independence referendum, we need to become independent. But I'm not the only one, and there will be, if they come forward with reasonable proposals, it only makes sense to look at them and take them seriously, right? And there will be people who want that, and I don't get to make the decision. I'm just one person, but my certainly my preference would be to go the independence route. But I wanted to point that out because Dr. Modry does make that very important point, and I think that people, because like I say, so many Albertans are afraid of independence, and they want just for Alberta to have a better deal. But even if they really, really wanted that, they should still support the independence referendum idea, because they'll never get a better deal for Alberta unless there's an independence referendum. Like just negotiating in the current situation we're in, it's like Dr. Modry says, we have no leverage. Like they have the power. If we say we want changes, they just say no. And that we can't do anything about that.
That's right. Yeah.
If we have an independence referendum, we have a very big alternative. And if they say no, we get to become independent. So if they don't want to negotiate, well, that's okay. We've got a better alternative. But if they do want to try and fix things, then those people who are afraid of leaving, maybe they'll get, the kind of thing that would benefit Alberta to a certain degree. You know what I mean? So the point is that whether you want Alberta to become independent or you just want a better deal, the independence referendum is really the only way for Alberta to get leverage, as Dr. Modry says. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I totally agree on that. And with that, I do want to ask your opinion. So let's say we get our 600,000 signatures that we need. Actually, let's say we get the contact information of 600,000. Then we go out, we get the actual 600,000 signatures. We push forward for a referendum on independence. We get people on board saying, yes, let's negotiate with the feds and figure out a better deal within Canada. If you had to say, I'm going to just say top three, I could probably ask top 5 or 10, but what would be your top 3 things that would make Alberta want to stay in? Would it be, and I'm just giving a couple of examples, would it be more representation? Would we have more MPs? Would we have more senators? Would we have less equalization payments? What would be your top 3 that you would think, okay, well, maybe this is actually going to work out?
I am skeptical that would work out.
I totally agree.
Certainly, I think the Senate reform idea is a really good idea. See, that gets us representation. Right now, we are so underrepresented within the Senate right now. It's not even funny.
That's right.
So we would have to have an equal number of senators from each province.
Yeah.
like you mentioned too, we're even underrepresented in the House of Commons, partly because that's our population is growing so fast and they can't keep up. That's part of it. That's not everything.
Yeah.
But we should have proper proportional representation in the House of Commons. We'd have more representatives that way.
Yeah.
And really, if the federal government would be really committed to federalism, like the idea of federalism is actually a good idea. It's that you have a federal government which deals with national issues like foreign affairs, defense, international trade, and then you have the provinces with education and healthcare and natural resources and things like that. When that's actually a good idea of doing things if they would stick with it. And Canada sort of stuck with it until Pierre Trudeau. And then he's kind of the one who said, well, let's get, he wouldn't say it, in terms of let's get rid of federalism. That's essentially what he was doing. He was overriding the provincial authority to take control of our resources. And that's just what Justin Trudeau's doing with his climate change policies. He's just running roughshod over what should be. And so, if they had a genuine commitment to federalism and it was actually understood and practiced, it could, it could theoretically it could work and it could be better. But again, I'm skeptical, because it's very, someone has pointed out, I think it might have been Ted Morton or Tom Flanagan, even when you have the Constitution right, the federal Liberals will find a way to undermine. That's what they've been doing for more than 50 years. But there'd have to be some kind of sincerity in there, more than just the deal. So there are probably things that could be done. There's probably people who've thought more about that because I've given up on the reform idea. I haven't spent much time thinking about it, if you know what I mean. Why would I think about an idea that will never come to pass? You know what I mean? So, because the referendum on independence is so it's so realistic, it's part of our constitutional law. We can do it, and it's of course it's constitutional law. It's also part of the Clarity Act, but it's there. It's an option. It's an option that Albertans can do ourselves, where we don't have to deal with anybody else. So it just seems to me the most realistic pathway for us to follow under the circumstances. And so I don't spend time thinking about what could be in kind of a Pollyanna world of what Canada could be or something.
That's fair. We've seen this time and time again, and you gave good examples of where we've tried and it just has not worked out in our favor. But there's a new guy coming in. There's a new Pierre Poilievre who has told everybody that he will reform things, he will make it good, and he's a conservative. Why can't we trust him? Why wouldn't he make things all better for us?
Well, first, on a relative scale, he would be better than Justin Trudeau. So I don't want to take away everything from him, but he's a member of Parliament for Ottawa. Literally, he represents Ottawa.
Yeah.
Those are the people who elect him. Those are the people he represents. Those are the interests he's going to represent. He's going to represent the interests of Ottawa and Ontario first. That's who he represents. And it's not a coincidence then that he has spoken out against the Alberta pension plan, right?
Yes, he has.
The Alberta pension plan is very good for Alberta.
Yeah.
The Alberta pension plan is not good for Ontario, and Pierre Poilievre is a member of Parliament for Ontario, right? And if I remember, actually, as I looked this up earlier today, he has not come out against the Paris Accord, right? The Paris Accord is the international agreement that puts obligations on Canada to reduce our carbon footprint, which means a lot of reducing aspects of our petroleum industry, and he has not come out against that. Now, if he was from Alberta, he'd be against that, right? But I think my impression is that Paris Accord is much more popular in central Canada than it is in Alberta.
Yeah, and we've had Michelle Sterling on from Friends of Science, and she has actually said and given proof that the Paris Accord is you can opt out anytime. Right? It's not a binding agreement. As a matter of fact, even the US walked away from it, and we could do the same thing, but I think we have leaders that are just pandering to the world and saying, oh, look at how good we are. We will follow whatever you want to do. And there's no backbone. And that's another thing. And people have said, well, I think Pierre will come in and he will have the backbone. But like you just said, he is not on the record saying that he will back out of the Paris Accord. So we're still going to be stuck with everything dealing with climate change, net zero, et cetera, and what are they even doing with that in terms of there's a federal portion of that, and then there is what's happening in Alberta, and of course Alberta has our resources. We should be able to do what we want to do with our resources, and not have to deal with the feds. But yet here we are. We're being told from the feds, no, this is exactly the way things are going to be.
Yeah, that's right. And that was kind of emphasized with the carbon tax Supreme Court decision, because the Alberta government challenged that. Actually, it was challenged under Kenny originally, right? So,
That's right. Yeah.
Justin brought in his carbon tax, which puts taxes, like I can't explain the exact legal details, but it impinges on Alberta's authority over our natural resources, as you're talking about. And yet the Supreme Court ruled that the climate emergency is so serious that they were just going to allow the federal government to do that. And they backed up a little bit with the Impact Assessment Act, a little bit, but still the federal government, is still going forward with it, just tweaking it or whatever. But again, like it seems that we have to remember that Supreme Court, there's 9 Supreme Court justices, 3 from Ontario, 3 from Quebec, 2 from the Maritimes, and 2 from the West. So there's 7 from the East and 2 from the West. And so we know where their priorities are, right? Again, it's part of the system that's against us. We're fighting against the system, and we can't win that way. So yeah, we're still going to have these problems, even with Pierre Poilievre as prime minister. Like I say, it's on a relative scale better than Justin, but it's just a relative thing. It's not a difference in kind. It's a difference in degree. Between Justin and Pierre
And likewise, I've actually had a conversation with a few people that didn't realize that Pierre is from Alberta.
Yeah, he's born and raised here. Yeah.
Yeah, but of course now he's an MP in Ontario, and people were just thinking, well, same thing as Joe Clark, if you want to, even though his was very short-lived, but with Stephen Harper being from Calgary as well, you certainly would think that they would have us in mind when anything's going forward, and of course that has not happened. I was going to ask about so here's another question that. Thought about in terms of the number. We see Justin Trudeau pushing through policy right now, right? In theory, he's still in a minority government, and he's got the coalition through Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, right?
Yeah.
So during these times when Harper was in, his was a majority government, was it not?
Well, the first few years was minority, and then he did have a majority at the end. Like he got a majority in 2011 to 2015.
Okay, because all I was thinking is that in his particular case, if he's talking about Senate reform, and he has all the Conservatives voting with him, then why didn't it go through?
Well, the article that I read said he had opposition from within his own caucus.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because he has MPs from Ontario and Quebec as well, right? So presumably, like I'm just kind of speculating here, but that would be, he did have some opposition within his own caucus, and that's presumably where it came from. And you don't want to do something again that Quebec's not favorable towards. Like I mentioned, the Quebec government, initiated a reference case against the kind of changes he wanted, right? So but one other thing, though, I should mention about Stephen Harper, since we're talking about him, like along these lines, is before he was elected, of course, Paul Martin was prime minister, and Paul Martin created a panel to look at the equalization program. Now, that panel issued the report after Stephen Harper became prime minister, and the panel recommended giving more money to Quebec, and Stephen Harper went with that panel's recommendation to give more money to Quebec, right? Because even though he's from Alberta, he needed to win in Quebec, right? He needs seats there to become the government. So he, does what a politician would do who wants to win seats, right? He gives more money there.
Yeah.
So it's not like that's not Stephen Harper in and of himself, in the sense that this is the system, right? If he wants to win, he's got to play by the rules, just like everybody else, whether it's Brian Mulroney or Pierre Poilievre or whatever. They have to play by the rules of catering to Central Canada if they want to be the government. Otherwise, they'll just be opposition leaders at best. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, which is why even we've talked about in the past about the Maverick Party. I mean, great idea, and maybe we can get some voices out here. But even if all of the seats were Maverick from Manitoba onward, we still wouldn't have enough seats.
No, that's true, but the other side, though, is it would if Maverick Party MPs were elected, that would send a signal. That would be that'd be national news. Like, whoa, what are these guys doing getting elected out there? You know what I mean? Yeah. So on the one hand, you're correct that wouldn't actually give us like legislative power in Ottawa. Yeah. But it would have an impact, in sending a signal to Eastern Canada, because my impression right now is they really don't pay much attention to us or what we want. You know what I mean? Yeah. But if we start electing people that had a very strong voice for the West, I think that would have an impact, and they would be able to speak out. They'd be able to. Right now, even conservative MPs have to be careful what they say. You know what I mean? They're strictly controlled in what they say publicly because they don't want to. It looks like they're going to win next year in the election, and the party does not want any trouble. They want people to be quiet and just cruise along into the majority government. So they're not allowed to say certain things. Whereas a Maverick Party MP would be able to say what needs to be said publicly. You know what I mean? And he wouldn't have to worry about not being in government because he's already not in government. So.
It's interesting that you did say about what people say, because again, I don't know if you've tried doing searches on the internet to look for certain articles or anything in relating to politics, but it's getting more and more difficult. And I think it's because of the media ban that the Trudeau government has put in. And a lot of us get our news from social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or even Twitter. Even the algorithms on X and Twitter, it doesn't seem to be chronological anymore. It's just based upon the algorithm of what you're used to, what you look for, and what your interests are. So if you're trying to look for something that's completely different, you will not see it. And I know that's going to be detrimental going into any new election going in, because elections that are happening in different provinces, we don't hear about in Alberta. And likewise, those other provinces don't even hear what's happening here. Right. So there's a lot of stresses that are working against us, and that if we had our own independent Alberta, or we're somehow able to stay within Canada and say, these are things that we want to have. Maybe we have our own news agency. Maybe we don't have a CRTC. We have a ATC or whatever it would be called. Right? Because what is happening and the laws that are going through in the federal government are ridiculous. And we had Sharon Polsky on the last webinar, and we were actually talking about parental rights and basically if how it would work in terms of protecting children from going online and seeing pornography. Again, everything is masked about, oh yes, it's for the kids and we're trying to save people, but basically what that would mean is that now we would have to have some sort of an implementation where we would need to show that we are who we are online. Right, some sort of digital ID. Maybe we have to pre-log in, basically, again, taking away our privacy, and that's one thing that we actually talked during that webinar about, and saying that's not going to go through. Well, guess what? S210 has now gone through the Senate and is now going to be read for a third time in the House of Commons. And again, this is something that has nothing to do with Alberta per se. But because we're part of Canada, they're just saying this is the way it is. We have our representatives, our MPs out there, but we're not getting representation at all.
Yeah, like there's this bigger picture in a sense, and for me personally, these kinds of things affect why I want to leave. Like, I mean, think of the Online Harms Act, which is, I don't know all the details, but my understanding is it's going to put it's going to put restrictions on what you can say and read on the internet. And you can be very easily charged with a hate crime and get punished for like very minor things.
Everything that we're doing right now could be a hate crime, right? Everything we're talking about could be a hate crime. You guys hate Canada, so we're going to lock you up. And not only that, but it's also in the past as well as in the future. The thought police.
Yeah.
If you have a history of doing something, they can say, well, you would, under these circumstances, probably be doing it in the future as well.
Yep. Yeah. Whenever I see that kind of thing, I think Alberta independence will solve that. Like literally it will. Like I don't give that as the arguments in my presentations, because there are other, there's people in Ontario and Quebec who want to stop that kind of thing too. And, so it's not a distinctively Alberta thing, but Alberta independence will solve a lot of those problems. And in fact, when I was talking at a different version of my talk last year, where I talked about the Charter of Rights and how it, they deliberately excluded property rights. which
Yes.
restricts our rights. Like by not protecting our property rights deliberately, that restricts our rights when it goes, before judicial interpretation. And we can solve that by becoming independent. Like there's all kinds of layers of problems in Canada, and we can fix them, try and fix them one by one and one by one. You know what I mean? But if we become independent, that fixes them all really fast.
No, I agree.
So these are the kinds of things, all these kind of problems you're talking about, we can fix them quickly. Like I say, I don't make these the features of my talks, generally speaking, but whenever I see that news, I'm just thinking, we need out so much. We so badly need out. It just kind of feeds more into the same solution, right? Because
I've got somebody waiting in the wings backstage here who's definitely going to be coming out and talking. And he was one of those right from the get-go that said, you know what? I think we can fix things. I think we can do this, and we just need to get together, and groups need to get together. Political groups need to get. And guess what? He realized after banging his head against the door and the hood of his Ford, whatever vehicle it was, he will tell us in a minute. Banging his head against that, he realized, no, this is not going to happen, and independence is pretty much the only way forward. I'm going to bring on the ex-CEO of the Alberta Prosperity Project, Mr. Christopher Scott. How are you, buddy?
Well, hello, Kerry. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thanks. And yourself?
I'm doing well.
I don't see any food in your background there. What's going on?
Well, I can't keep too much food around me when she's here.
Oh, yes, the cat is there right behind your name. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So have you been listening in?
I have been for a few minutes, yeah. I was quite intrigued by the topic, and I got to say, whenever I've heard Dr. Wagner speak on this subject, it just solidifies my resolve to do everything I can to get Alberta to the point where we have the leverage of a referendum, because he's exactly correct. There is no other way. And Kerry, you touched on it. You said at one point, I thought if we could get everyone together, unite the political parties, get everybody unified around this idea that we need our sovereignty back in order to overcome these obstacles, we could fix things. And that is true. But what is also true is we're never going to unify everybody because there's too many different things people are concerned about.
Yep.
So, you're absolutely right, Dr. Wagner, about that.
Yeah. Yes, you had... oh, that was you that replied back. What kind of car you had banging your head against? It was a Gran Torino.
Yeah.
And you saw
it's gone now, but at one point.
Yeah. But that's exactly the way it was. I remember having conversations right at the beginning of our friendship, right after you stood up, and of course we lost our bar. So where else were we going to go but go to the whistle stop and hang out in the campground for a few months, literally a few months, and the conversations were about, yes, we can fix this. And then as you got more into politics, and of course, as I got more into politics, we realized that we're just doing the same thing over and over and waiting for somebody else to come and save us. And I think the only one that is able to save us is ourselves.
Yeah. And you know what really opened my eyes to that? I used to think if we just elect good politicians, good people to the legislature, then they'll fix these things for us. Yeah. And maybe someday, like sometime a long time ago, that might have been the case, but things have changed. And politicians they don't campaign on virtue and principle anymore. Yeah. They campaign on what they feel is going to get them elected. Just like you mentioned earlier with Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper wrote the firewall letter. Like, he knows what Alberta needs to do to insulate itself against a tyrannical federal government that's interfering in our sovereignty. Yeah. And he was elected, and he didn't do any of those things. He never talked about it again. And there's a reason for that. It's because politicians these days, with the way information flows, they cannot do those things without the support of the people. So how do you get the support of the people? Well, you educate them as to what the problems are and what the solutions are, so that you create this parade, this huge parade of Albertans that know what direction we need to go. We're demanding these changes. And then the politicians all of a sudden will start trying to get in front of that parade and doing those things, much like we've been seeing, from in little ways with our current government. We created that parade. We said we wanted those things, and they've started to do some of them. So that tells me that that's a successful path we could take. And if we take that path together, and we build this parade, this movement that wants our sovereignty in this province back, the politicians will get in front of it. And if they choose not to, still, because most of them are chickens, we have the Citizens Initiative referendum legislation. So we can do it ourselves. We don't need to rely on them to do it. We need to be the ones to demand it and have them decide, hey, the wind is blowing that way, so I'm going to go that way too.
Yeah. And we have had quite a few questions in regards. I'm going to call up some of the questions that have come up in the comments. But what would be the actual process in terms of us becoming independent? So we've talked about, we need to do the Citizens Initiative. We need 600,000 signatures. We need to plunk it, or basically do it as a Citizens Initiative in front of legislature to say, this is what the citizens demand from our government. Let's get into a conversation with the federal government. Let's say the federal government says, no, you know what? This is not going to work out for you guys. Go ahead and do your own thing. What are the next steps after that? Because some people think that our provincial government just becomes all of a sudden our federal government, and that is not the way it would work. Michael, do you want to maybe have any comments on what you would anticipate would happen?
Yeah, well, like a lot of this is speculative, right? Because it's never happened before. But one of the best ideas I've ever heard with regard to Alberta independence was Professor Leon Craig from the University of Alberta wrote an article where he proposed that the Alberta government set up what's called the Ministry of Independence Preparation, because there will be all kinds of details that need to be taken care of in terms of how Alberta would become independent. So we could set up an actual provincial, like a department of the government where the people who work there, the lawyers and so on, would work out the different details, because there will be different details of different policy levels, whether it's energy or we have like military bases in Alberta. What would happen to those? That's what about the police? What about the national parks? But rather than citizens trying to figure out what we're going to do together, we'd have a department of government to figure that out. And I think that's the way to do it, because then you'd have professionals in those areas who can work out the details and negotiate with the federal government. So we couldn't give anybody a strictly detailed timeline or process of how this will go, because it's never been done before. We would have the referendum. We'd have the referendum, and assuming we got the clear majority and it's a clear question, that would trigger the negotiations, right? And so that's never been done before. So we're kind of breaking new ground. But like as I mentioned earlier, I'm quite sure the federal government would bring proposals, try and keep us in, so it's impossible to say how long the negotiations would take part. It's impossible to say what those proposals will be and stuff. So, and people say, well, this sounds really risky because we don't know what we're doing. And there is an element of that, but there's an element of risk in everything we do. There's an element of risk in remaining in Canada, because as long as we have, the kinds of people we have running the federal government, they want to shut down our economy. They want to do the just transition and get our workers out of the energy industry. They want to take away our power, the way we generate power in this province. In fact, they want to force us to use electric vehicles rather than, I think that's a bigger risk than trying to pursue a government that will rule in favor of our interests. This is the thing, I like to emphasize too. If Alberta was to become independent, our own government, then everybody that we elect will be pursuing our interests, because we're the ones who elected them. Now that's the case, say, at the local and provincial government. But they are what's currently the Alberta government would. There's a sense in which we become the national government as an independent. At least in the initial stages, that would be our national government. But they would be doing what's best for us because we're electing them. Right now, the people who are making the decisions over us on major topics were not elected by us. They were elected by people in Toronto and Montreal, when sometimes Vancouver, but the people, people like Justin Trudeau and Stephen Guilbeault, and Chrystia Freeland, they're not elected by us, right? They're elected by people 3,000 kilometers away. They do not have our best interests in mind, and they don't have to, because they will get reelected without having our interests in mind. Because you know what I mean? They're catering to their people who voted for them in Toronto and Montreal. But when we are independent, everyone that gets elected in Alberta will be for Alberta. Nobody that's elected in Alberta is going to try and do what's best for Toronto, otherwise they'd be put out, right? So one of the best points of Alberta being independent is that everyone we elect here is going to be looking out for our best interests as Albertans. We need to elect a government that's going to do what's best for us and not what's best for people in a different part of the country, which is how it's working right now. So I think I kind of drifted from your question originally, but
no, you know what? That was brilliant, and actually, I didn't want to interrupt you because I'm going to keep that little clip right there, then, because that is the perfect example that, you know, if you're electing someone in Alberta to represent Albertans, then that's exactly what we want to do. And if those MPs go off to Ottawa, then we know that even though they're up in the House Commons and they're saying, yeah, we want to do this in Alberta, everyone else is going to say, well, forget that, we're doing something else. But if we had our own Alberta government and our own federal government, if you want to call it that in terms of Alberta, everybody that's elected is dealing with Alberta. And that is exactly what we want to do.
There's another aspect to that too. So I do hear this from time to time. People, oh, well, you know, we're not sure what's going to happen. There's some risk involved. Well, let's put this in perspective. So in the mid 17th century, mid 1760, 1770, something like that, our neighbors to the south were under the control and direction of the British Empire. Mm-hmm. They were taxed into oblivion. They were tyrannized. Their interests weren't served. And a group of them stood up and said, you know what? We're not going to take this. We are free people and we're going to live free. We're not going to be tied to this government that doesn't have our best interests in heart. And so they declared independence and they said, we're not going to follow you anymore. And for them, the risks were substantial. Thousands of people lost their lives. It was a bloody, bloody war fought not between the United States Continental Army, but also against the British, but also with the people who were loyal to the king in the colonies at the time. They also fought against the people who wanted to be independent. The risks they endured were like, our risks we're looking at are nothing compared to that. What is our risks? Oh, well, who's going to manage international trade? I don't know. Anybody will do it better than Justin Trudeau. What are we going to do with our military? How are we going to afford a military? Well, gee, we spent $13.1 billion on the military in 2019, but we send Quebec $12 billion every year for which we don't get a penny back.
That's
Pretty sure
right.
we can build the military. Oh, well, what about port access? Well, you know, the economy and trade is driven by mutually beneficial transactions, of which we have a very strong bargaining position. So the risks, they're all fluff. When people talk about the risks of Alberta independence, it's just fluff based on ignorance to the facts and a fear of change. Mm-hmm. And that's where education comes in. We need to educate people on all of these things. And once we do that, and once we make it clear that the benefits far, far outweigh the trivial risks, I mean, this should be, logic and reason tells me that this should be a wave of a desire to be independent and chart our own course towards prosperity instead of what we've been doing for the last 1905, 2023, 118 years. I want to change. And Michael, you nailed it when you said the risks of staying under these terms far outweigh the risks of an uncertain future, of which our future is uncertain anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I did want to get to some of these questions and even some of the comments too, because again, lots of these sorts of questions. Loretta asks, when is this going to happen? When's independence? It's past time. I'm for one that's tired of waiting. And a few of those that have asked that same sort of question. Again, the idea behind this and educating people on what the Alberta Prosperity Project is doing to educate people for independence is we need to follow the rules, I guess, of the system that we're in right now. So if we do a citizens initiative, we need 600,000 signatures. That takes time in order to do it. It's got to go through the legislature. That takes time. But I think maybe what the question is when is everybody going to get off their ass and actually sign something and let's make this happen?
When something affects them.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's got to affect them before anybody. If you're comfortable, if you're working or you're busy doing something else, you're not going to know anything and you're just going to keep going the way it is. And you really don't do anything until it affects you.
Like, I think another part of it too, as Christopher was mentioning, is the educational function, and that's where APP, can really make a contribution, because historically the independence movement, it rises and falls based on anger. Something will happen, people get really angry, there'll be like a surge of support for the movement, and then it just peters out again for a while till the next surge of anger. And part of that, I think, is because people aren't really settled in their mind that this is the best thing. So education can settle people in their mind that this is, if they look at the history and they look at the different issues, they can think about it and really come to a conclusion that this is what's best. And so that so that the support for independence just doesn't radically go up and down depending on circumstances, but people get, got a firm conviction. This is the future that we need, is an independent Alberta. So even if today things don't look that bad, I still want, in the long term, Alberta to become independent. So I think that we are making some progress. I mean, I'm just speculating, but I think in the last few years we've made some progress this way. With APP and some other educational endeavors that they're helping people understand that we've had this problem for a really long time, and so it's not something that can be solved really quickly, but it's something we need to keep in mind, that even if things feel good today, or even if Pierre Poilievre gets elected, we're still going to have problems, and the long-term solution the only solution that will actually solve Alberta's problems within Canada is independence. So I'm just trying to emphasize the educational function that APPs and others are doing.
I actually think the best thing that could happen for the independence movement is to have Justin Trudeau elected again.
I was just going to say that. The Canadian prime ministers have been Western independence's best salesmen throughout the history of this country.
Yeah. Because if Pierre gets in, people are just going to sit back and they'll go, oh, you know what? He's going to solve all our problems, and I can go golfing and I can go whatever. But if Pierre gets in, people will go, I can't believe we're living this hell again. If anybody's into that. I mean, there are a lot of supporters of the NDP and the Liberal Party in Alberta. And I've briefly had conversations with them, and then they don't want to have a conversation again. But I think it's important for people to realize that the only way that this seems to get better for us as Albertans is if it gets worse.
Well, there is another side to that, Barry. I think Pierre Poilievre is probably a decent dude and really wants to do some good and really wants to be the prime minister more than anything. Yeah. He's also going to be a good salesman for the idea of Western independence or Alberta independence, because nothing will change. Oh, he cannot do anything to change the balance of power in this country. He cannot do anything to right the wrongs or improve the equality of the provinces without losing his spot in the PMO chair. It just can't happen. We've watched it happen over and over and over again. Why would we expect it to change? So in my opinion, if people are paying attention, the people that are thinking, oh, well, Pierre Poilievre is going to get elected and things are going to get better for Alberta, those people are independence-minded Albertans that are going to be ready to sign when they realize that that's not going to happen. So all paths lead to Alberta independence. All scenarios lead to a growing of this movement. And really, it's only a matter of time before enough people get off their butts and get it done. I just hope it happens sooner rather than later, because I'd rather have that leverage, negotiate a better position within Confederation, smooth things over, good to go. Of course, if not, then we need to leave. But if we wait too long, there is no hope of saving anything. It'll just get so bad that there is no other option than to completely leave, and negotiations won't get anything done. So now or never.
That's right. Here's another question, Debbie says, why are Albertans so afraid of change? I'm a senior and I see the benefits to this. Is it the NDP fear mongering? They do get their mugs on MSN, mainstream media, way more than conservatives. And that is very, very true. So here's the thing we've talked about before. So I'm a member of the Alberta UCP, the Independence Party, Wild Rose, and the NDP, right? Because I wanted to see what is going on with the NDP. Chris, I know you're a member of the NDP. What did we get? 5 emails a day from the NDP asking for $5. And who are you voting for the leader, right?
They're committed.
And not only are they being funded by the unions, they, in their letters, actually say, we don't have heavy corporate funding, so we need your $5 in order to get your voice heard. And I'm thinking, no, you guys have union money that going up the yin yang. This is ridiculous.
Can I just go on record here as saying I am not now, nor have I ever, I'm not now, nor have I ever been a member of the NDP.
I was waiting for them to revoke my membership, and they never did. So maybe after this one they will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man,
it is a little embarrassing.
Yeah.
But
And you're right. They are.
Go ahead, Terry.
All I was going to say is they are on mainstream media, so they get commercials, they get front and center again. So, having been in the entertainment industry, they're run by unions, IATSE, and all these other groups out there. So, of course, they're going to give them airtime. They're gonna promote them on social media because, according to them, they promote the same values as they do, and maybe they do to a certain extent. But basically, they're getting either free or subsidized, or maybe even the unions are paying top dollar for promoting them on sporting events. Literally, I've seen NDP ads on hockey games and football, and the little tickers that go along the bottom of the screens. And yet, I could probably count on one finger the number of times I've actually seen a UCP ad, other than during an election time.
Michael, do you remember that book? I think you mentioned it in one of your talks. Is it called like the Communist Playbook or the Communist Rulebook or something like that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Not offhand. Sorry, I'm not offhand. I can't.
There's a book, and it's written by some real hardcore socialists, and it basically explains how you transform a society from a capitalist model society to a socialist model society and implement communism.
Oh yes, yeah.
It's some sort of a playbook. And in that book, one of the things it mentions was you always use your enemy's rule book against them. Mm-hmm. So the way the NDP have gotten so entrenched in this province and in this country is they've used effective educational campaigns and a lot of money to convince people that the way to do the things, or the way to improve things in the manner that they want them improved, is to vote for them. So there are people in this province that believe if you don't vote for NDP, your hospitals will be sold, your children will be arrested for being gay, you will have to pay to go visit a doctor. They've done educational campaigns convincing people of that. So, there's a huge opportunity here from the perspective of education to change those NDP voters. And I'm not talking about the hardcore, we want communism voters. I'm talking about the soft NDP members, voters who want better healthcare, better work, labor rules, those types of things, the things that we really all want.
Yeah.
An independent Alberta, and actually even a responsible conservative government Alberta, can give them and will give them all those things, not just smoke and mirrors pretending with some BS propaganda campaign, but we can actually do those things. Like right. Michael, in your talks, you explain how an independent Alberta can address all of those societal concerns that we all face right now that cause a lot of people to move towards NDP. So we have this opportunity to, through education, to change that voting bloc in favor of something that can actually get it done. But the only way it happens is if people get involved, they donate their time, they donate their money, and we educate everybody based on reality instead of fairy tale ideology that's being pushed by the NDP and the federal government. So it's just an opportunity.
That's right. Yeah. The whole idea behind APP and being an educational society is we really are nonpartisan. We've said this publicly many times that we would have to work with or at least talk to whoever the government is. And if it was the NDP, we'd be talking to them. It just so happens it's the UCP. But every issue that we talk about is nonpartisan. We're talking about the pension plan right now. And yet the NDP and the Liberals are saying, no, we want to keep our money in the CPP. Don't forget about Auntie Alice, who lives in Newfoundland, and she's got her pension coming to her. We don't want to take away from that. We wouldn't be taking away from that. And if anything, the pension would be a benefit to everybody in Alberta. Whether it doesn't matter what side of the fence you want to be on. It would definitely be a benefit to Albertans. And same with, we've talked employment insurance, immigration, the policing. I mean, all of those subjects that are in basically what provinces can do, all the provinces can do. It's not just Alberta. All the provinces can do all that. It's just that we're the ones that are in the best position to be doing it. Financially, maybe we have the will to do it. We're very independence-minded anyways. We're very entrepreneurial, et cetera, et cetera. We're the ones that are saying, okay, let's step up and see what we can do.
Yep, exactly.
If I can just throw something in here about the NDP that a lot of people don't realize, I think, is that the NDP is structured quite differently from other political parties in Canada.
Yeah.
Like if you join the NDP, they don't have a separate provincial and federal wing. Like Conservative Party, you can join the United Conservative Party without being part of the Conservative Party of Canada and vice versa.
That's right.
That's not the same with the NDP. Like when you join the NDP, you're in the NDP. You know what I mean?
So and it's the branch manager here in Alberta.
That's the point. It's the branch plant. So if you join the NDP in Alberta, you're supporting the current federal government. Like this NDP.
Chris, I didn't know that.
Oh, I didn't mean to rebuke you guys.
I did know that.
I just hope our payment processing fees kind of at least negated our membership cost.
But like this is just for a general audience, you know, because there are people in Alberta who support the NDP, but they hate Trudeau, and they don't realize that by supporting the NDP, they're helping to keep Trudeau in power. Like it's important for Albertans to realize that, like, if you're not in support of the climate change policies of the federal government, you should be against the NDP here in Alberta, because like the Alberta NDP is essentially the branch plant of the current federal government on a party level, right? Because our Liberal Party is like almost non-existent as a provincial party, but the NDP is part of the federal government when their alliance with Justin Trudeau. So the Alberta NDP is helping to keep Justin Trudeau in power. And to support the policies that are hurting Alberta, you know, by the just transition or whatever, or the the carbon tax. So anyway, I just want people to realize that. Like, I think this is a way of, for some people who support the NDP, if they knew that, I think that they would turn away from the NDP if they knew that they were part of they were part of the structure that was keeping an anti-Alberta government in power federally.
Yeah. And that's how they do what they do. They have the support of that much larger organization federally, like nationally. So if the NDP knows, okay, well, BC, they're going to vote NDP because they just like to be abused, so we don't have to spend a lot of time and resources there. Manitoba, they're going to do it as well because they're have-not and people just want more from the government, so they're going to vote NDP. We don't need to worry about them. But Alberta, we need to pump a bunch of resources in here, and they do. Like if you gave me our we did an estimated budget for an effective referendum campaign to get it done in 3 years, and it was about $20 million a year. And if you think about that, it sounds like a big number. I mean, to me, it's a big number, but in the political landscape, it's not. It costs about $20 million to win an election. So if you gave me $60 million, we could probably pump out an educational campaign that would turn the tides in 3 years. It could be done. The NDP, because they're a national organization, they can pump considerable amount of money into our province and shift our society towards their goals. It's a dirty game. Yeah. And the only thing that's going to fix it is education.
Yeah. Totally agree on that. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why we do these. It's why we do them every Wednesday. So hopefully every Wednesday we have viewers here. I know there's an Oilers banner behind Dr. Wagner's head right there. The other way. I know it's backwards. And I actually had this schedule, but I'm not sure if it was on a Wednesday when they play again. I don't think so for a bit, but again, that's a distraction. Not that that's a bad thing. I enjoy hockey, and I think it's good to at least have sports and those sorts of distractions going on in our lives. But at the same time, there's a lot of other stuff that happens, and my Twitter feed every day, I just cannot believe what is going on. And just like Chris said, one of the ways to get out of all of that stuff that's happening is just to become independent.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I'm a very independent person, and I do my own plumbing, of which I was supposed to finish yesterday, but I did a podcast or a little live stream instead, and now I'm supposed to be doing it tonight. So I better say goodnight, guys. But thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Dr. Wagner, for doing this webinar. I really appreciate it, and I know a lot of people that are watching and commenting appreciate it as well. So thank you for your hard work.
Excellent. Well, go do your plumbing, and thanks a lot for Chris, and thanks for everything that you do. I know you like even today it was, hey, I've got some time, I can probably come on, and it's like, you don't have time, you can't come on.
I don't have time, but I really
Yeah.
enjoy it. I like to do it. I'm happy to help when I can. So when I can come on, I will. So.
Especially
Thanks for
for a topic so near and dear to your heart now as Alberta independence. So thank you again.
Okay.
All right.
See you guys.
Good to see you, Scott. Sorry to see you. Good to see you, Chris. I don't know why I keep calling you Scott. I'm
you know
sorry.
what? Some people call me Scott, and they don't even know what my last name is. So don't even worry about it.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk to you later then, Chris.
Yeah.
Funny, I got him out of there, but I was at an event last night, and I walk in, and immediately I had a couple of people walk up to me and shake my hand and start talking, and we go through a list of the attendees, and of course my name is on there, Kerry, and he goes, "Well, I don't see your name on here," and I go, "It's right there, it's Kerry," and he goes, "You're Kerry?" He thought I was Chris. No, Chris is taller than me, and definitely not as good looking. Oh, that is funny. Do you want to have any last comments about Alberta independence or any history in the making or anything like that?
Could I do a little bit of advertising, or?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Absolutely, please do.
Well, I do have books on Alberta independence. Like as we mentioned, I think we mentioned earlier that I have one that'll be coming out in a little while. Yeah. But in the meantime, I've got this one here. No Other Option.
No Other Option. Yeah.
Self-Determination for Alberta. So this is my case for Alberta independence that I wrote in 2021, and I think it's still valid. So that's kind of my flagship book when it comes to independence-related issues. Yeah. And a few years earlier, I wrote this book, Alberta Separatism Then and Now, which is a history of the Alberta independence movement up until about 2009. But so this book has like the fight against Pierre Trudeau in the 1970s and the National Energy Program and that kind of thing, and the formation of the Reform Party. So anybody who's interested in those kinds of issues, those books are available online. The first one is available on Amazon, and both of them are available on merchantship.ca, which is a small business based in Didsbury. So you're supporting an Alberta business if you go through that avenue. Anyway, awesome. I just thought I'd throw that in there because I really didn't have anything else to say. So
no, that's great. I mean, you've written a lot. And you've researched a lot, and that's why we respect everything that you say, because you've done the legwork. You are so educated in what has happened, and I'm so glad that you're able to basically make us understand the issues much better. And so anybody that's watching, really, you need to go out and share this information. And especially of having Michael Wagner on with such a vast knowledge of the topic. We've seen this time and time again, and we're done. There is no other solution to this. We've tried it again, and we'll keep banging our heads against the Gran Torino, per se, and that's just not going to happen. So again, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Wagner. Always a pleasure. And I'm not sure if I should say go Oilers, go. I guess I should.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be on here. Yeah,
you
and Chris are a lot of fun to be with. So
good. Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm going to push you to the back. I'm just going to finish off with a couple of quick things. You're more than welcome to stay on if you want, but thank you. Sure. Again, Dr. Michael Wagner, author, historian, all-around great guy, talking about Alberta independence. And as, of course, you know, thank you so much for everybody that stays on and listens to us ramble. You know, we try and put these into about an hour and a half, and we're about the hour and a half point. And the great thing about these podcasts is that we do post them, but we also do the after post. So if you go onto the chrisandkerryshow.com, I usually digest these and push them out to Spotify and Rumble and all these different things that you can listen to while you're driving, and that seems to be how I get a lot of my information. I do a lot of miles. I think last year was 180,000 miles. That's a lot of miles. And so what are you going to do? You might as well be listening to podcasts and get yourself educated. So what a great way of doing that by doing this. And of course, we do this every Wednesday, like literally every Wednesday. And we have new speakers and new information as we go along. Next Wednesday, I'm actually quite excited about this one too. We'll be talking with James Roguski, who's a researcher and natural health proponent and activist, and who many of you may know from previous APP webinars about the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty. That was supposed to go through at the end of May. However, it did not for various reasons. However, that's not reason to celebrate just yet. We'll be talking about what happened and what can happen in the background, and why we still need to be involved with talking to our governments to say, we don't want an unelected group from outside of this country making decisions for us. And we've kind of talked about that all night or all evening about the feds doing this. This would be a world or a global group making decisions on the pandemic treaty. I say that's utter garbage. So we need to educate people and get people involved. So again, I hope to see you guys next Wednesday. Get on that freedomcalendar.net, find out what events are happening in and around your area. And I hope to see you guys again soon. Have a great night, everybody.